Welcome to Life Stories. What happens when a power-hungry cop crosses paths with a woman who outranks him in every way that truly matters? A simple traffic stop spirals into a battle for respect, justice, and accountability, one that forces both sides to confront their own flaws, fears, and beliefs. In a world where power often shields the guilty, Jessica Williams, a decorated military officer, refuses to be silenced by authority. But what happens when the fight for justice isn't just about winning? It's about redefining the very systems that control us. Stick with us as we unfold a story that will make you question authority, empathy, and the price of standing up for what's right. This isn't just about a ticket, it's about a battle for something far more important. Let's dive into the story. It was a Wednesday night in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of night that hangs heavy in the air, the hum of the city just a distant memory as the streets began to empty, save for the occasional car heading home. The dark asphalt stretched endlessly ahead, bathed in the harsh glow of the streetlights. In the driver's seat of a black SUV, Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Williams found herself deep in thought as the miles rolled by. Her mind wasn't on the road, but on the meeting she just left. 2 hours south of here, her team had wrapped up an important logistics brief, and now she was on her way back to Fort Bragg. The SUV was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic hum of tires against pavement. Jessica's fingers drummed lightly on the steering wheel as she hummed softly, lost in thought. She was a woman who thrived in quiet moments, the calm before the storm. At least that's how she preferred to think of her life. After over 2 decades in the military, 2 deployments, and a laundry list of accolades, Jessica had learned the art of keeping her composure. But tonight felt different. There was something about the night, something heavy in the air that she couldn't quite shake. Then, in her rearview mirror, a flash of blue lights. Without hesitation, Jessica slowed the vehicle, pulling to the side of the road. She was calm, controlled, just like she'd been taught. Her hands stayed at the wheel as she waited for the officer to approach. Sergeant Brian Matthews was tall, his figure cutting a stark silhouette in the dim light. His hand rested near his holster, his other gripping a flashlight that flicked on, the beam piercing the night. He didn't greet her, didn't ask for her ID first. Instead, he simply barked, "License and registration." Jessica's eyebrow twitched, but she remained silent. With steady hands, she retrieved her documents from the glove compartment, her mind working through the scenario. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't swerved, hell, she hadn't even been in the wrong lane. "Officer, may I ask why I've been stopped?" she asked, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of authority. "You were drifting between lanes," Matthews said, shining the light in her face. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been drinking." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't. License and registration." Matthews didn't respond to her challenge. He just repeated the order louder. "I said, license and registration." She handed him her military ID, her fingers barely grazing his. "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee." She watched his face for any flicker of recognition. A smirk tugged at the corner of Matthews' lips. "Military, huh? Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was," Jessica replied evenly, still composed. Then, without warning, he ordered, "Step out of the vehicle." Jessica blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, step out. I'm doing a sobriety test." "On what grounds?" Jessica's voice was tight now, a hint of confusion and anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I've cooperated fully. I haven't been drinking." Matthews didn't answer. Instead, he moved closer, his hand hovering by his holster. His voice dropped an octave, more forceful. "You refusing a lawful order?" Jessica didn't flinch. "I'm asking for an explanation," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion stirring inside her. He didn't like that. Without warning, he wrenched open her door, his grip tight on the frame. "Out, now." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just turned on her phone camera, silently hitting record. "Just so we're clear," she said quietly, "this conversation is being recorded." For the first time, Matthews hesitated. His eyes flicked to the phone in her hand. But his pride won. He still insisted she step out, his tone dripping with authority. Jessica stepped out of the car, standing tall, her posture unyielding. She wasn't aggressive, but there was no mistaking the quiet strength in her. She passed the sobriety test without a stumble, without a slur. Still, Matthews wrote her a ticket for failure to maintain lane. He didn't even look at her as he handed it over, but she took it without a word, her gaze hard and unwavering. As she slid back into her SUV and drove away, Matthews had no idea that this ticket would set a chain of events in motion that would change everything. The next day, Jessica sat at her desk at Fort Bragg, staring at the screen in front of her. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered resistance from someone in power. Hell, it wouldn't be the last. But something about this particular stop gnawed at her. It wasn't about the ticket. It wasn't about the arrogance of Sergeant Matthews. It was about the larger picture. It was about the power trip. The subtle shift in the balance of authority. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let it slide. She wasn't the type to make noise over every injustice. She didn't want drama, but this was different. The sense of indignity, the violation of trust, it was too much to ignore. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every soldier she'd mentored, every civilian she'd seen mistreated. A call to military lawyers, a complaint filed. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for accountability. Weeks later, Sergeant Matthews received the summons. He laughed when he opened the manila envelope, the weight of it barely registering. "No way," he muttered to himself. But the smirk that usually accompanied his confidence faltered when he saw the name on the envelope. "Court summons?" Matthews whispered to himself. He could hear his boss's voice in his head, telling him to prepare for what was coming. But it was already too late. He had crossed a line he never should have. And when the truth of Jessica's rank and the contents of the video emerged, Matthews' world began to crack. Could an officer ever truly understand the consequences of his actions if he never had to face them head-on? Will Matthews face the music, or will his badge continue to shield him from accountability? As Jessica sat in her office, the court date loomed closer. She knew that this wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones worth fighting. The clock was ticking, and Jessica, though calm on the surface, was ready for what came next. Will Jessica's pursuit of justice finally bring about real change? Or will the weight of power once again tip the scales in favor of those who believe they are untouchable? The next chapter would reveal the true cost of standing up for what's right. The days leading up to the court date dragged on, each one filled with a sense of mounting pressure. Jessica spent her nights reviewing the footage again, each frame burning itself into her memory. It wasn't just about the ticket anymore. It was about something deeper. Something she had tried to ignore for years. The courtroom buzzed with activity, reporters filling the front rows and whispers circulating among the officers in attendance. Everyone knew who she was now, knew what had happened. The case had become public, and the whispers were no longer just about Matthew's reckless actions. They were about her. Jessica entered the courtroom that morning with a quiet resolve. Her uniform gleamed in the harsh overhead lights, the medals on her chest reflecting a lifetime of service. But it wasn't the uniform or the accolades that commanded respect. It was the stillness in her eyes. The calm certainty that she was about to stand, not just for herself, but for every single person who had ever felt small under the weight of unchecked authority. As she made her way to the witness stand, she couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. The officers from the local police department sat together, their eyes flicking nervously from one another, their discomfort palpable. And there was Matthews, sitting at the defense table, his expression a carefully constructed mask of indifference. But Jessica saw the truth in his eyes. His facade was cracking. He knew this was bigger than either of them. The proceedings began, and Jessica answered the questions with the same calm precision she had used on the stand in every mission brief, every war zone, every life or death situation. She didn't flinch when the prosecution played the footage of the stop. She didn't even blink when they showed Matthews's body camera footage, the harshness of his words, the way his hand hovered dangerously near his weapon. The jury saw it all: his intimidation, his overreach, his lack of restraint. But when Matthew's lawyer, Charles Brenner, took his turn, the tone shifted. The questioning was sharp, trying to cut through Jessica's composed exterior. "Lieutenant Colonel Williams, isn't it possible Officer Matthews was simply doing his job? Isn't it his responsibility to ensure everyone on the road is safe?" Jessica's gaze never wavered. "My responsibility is to serve, to lead, to follow the rules," she replied. "I expect the same from everyone in authority. But when a badge becomes an excuse for cruelty, for intimidation, that is not duty. That's abuse of power." The silence in the room was thick, the weight of her words settling over everyone. For a brief moment, even Matthew's lawyer faltered, unsure how to respond. But then, Matthews spoke. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I didn't know who she was," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I thought she was just another driver. I didn't know." His voice trailed off, as if the words were too heavy to finish. Jessica's heart clenched. She had expected the deflection, but hearing it in his voice, hearing the admission, the crack in his armor, hit harder than she'd anticipated. Her mind flashed back to that night, to the feeling of his hand near his holster, to the way he had treated her like a criminal when all she had done was ask for clarity. He had dismissed her humanity, her service, her very being. And now, here he was, trying to justify his actions with the excuse of not knowing who she was. But deep down, Jessica knew that wasn't the real issue. It never had been. Matthew's words were an admission, but not an apology. The truth hung in the air like smoke, suffocating the room. "Not knowing who I was doesn't excuse what you did," Jessica said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. "You didn't treat me as a person. You treated me as an obstacle, a problem to be handled. That's the real issue, Sergeant." The room held its breath as Matthews looked away, unable to meet her gaze. His lawyer tried to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. Matthews had shown his true self, and there was no denying it anymore. The rest of the trial passed in a blur. But in that moment, Jessica realized something that hit her harder than anything else. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced by the weight of authority. She was fighting for every person who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or ignored simply because someone in power didn't think they mattered. When the jury deliberated and returned with their verdict, the room was tense. Jessica stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done everything by the book, everything right, but this wasn't about procedure anymore. This was about justice, real justice. The judge read the decision, and as the words fell from her lips, Jessica's heart sank, then soared. The jury found in her favor, but the ruling didn't bring the satisfaction she had expected. Instead, it brought something deeper, something more powerful. The recognition that the system could be held accountable, that people could make a difference. But as she looked around the courtroom, she felt something shift inside her. The truth was, the fight wasn't over. This ruling was just a small victory in a much larger war, a war against a system that was designed to protect those who abused their power. Jessica knew that this would not be the last time she would have to stand up to face the consequences of her actions. But for now, she had done what was needed. She turned to leave, her eyes scanning the room. Matthews was gone, and the whispers had already begun. How much power does one person really have to change the system? Will Jessica's fight inspire others to stand up, or will it remain just one small victory in a sea of injustice? The case was over, but Jessica knew the battle had just begun. What would the future hold for her now? And what would happen when the next injustice came knocking at her door? As she stepped outside the courthouse, she looked at the sky, the clouds slowly parting to reveal the stars. The night felt heavier than ever before. The next chapter in this fight was just beginning. The weeks following the trial passed by in a blur for Jessica. The courtroom buzzed with whispers of her victory, the story of her standing tall against the system spreading across news outlets and social media. Yet, as the noise of the world continued to swirl around her, She remained the same. The uniform, the medals, the accolades, they were all just symbols of her duty, nothing more. But there was a weight that hadn't lifted. It wasn't the court case, it wasn't the public eye. It was the deep, internal realization that the fight she had started was far from over. The win, though significant, felt like just a small step in the face of something far larger. Justice had been served, yes, but the deeper questions were still unanswered. One evening, as she sat at her desk at Fort Bragg, staring at the same computer screen she had seen countless times before, Jessica felt a strange, gnawing emptiness. Her phone buzzed softly beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from Sergeant Daniels flashed across the screen. "You did it, ma'am. You've made a change. People are talking." She stared at the words, unsure how to feel. She had made a change. She knew that much. But as she leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, a thought crossed her mind. What if the change wasn't enough? What if the victory was just a fleeting moment in a system too ingrained, too broken, to be fixed by one person standing tall? Her phone buzzed again, but this time, the name that appeared on the screen made her stomach churn. It was Matthews. She had expected his silence, had thought that the court ruling had buried the past between them. But here it was again, the unresolved tension. "I've been moved to desk duty. They're trying to transfer me to another precinct. This whole thing," his message read. "I've lost everything." Jessica stared at the message for a long moment, her heart stirring with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Part of her felt the weight of the justice system she had fought for. It had worked. But another part of her, the part that had stood in that courtroom and refused to back down, the part that had led soldiers into danger without hesitation, felt something else. A strange, heavy compassion for Matthews. She had won. He had lost. And yet, the scales didn't feel balanced. Not in the way she had imagined. Justice, it seemed, didn't always feel like a clean slate. Sometimes it left scars on everyone involved. The next day, she walked into the base office, the same place where she had spent countless hours leading soldiers, managing logistics, ensuring the machinery of war ran smoothly. The walls were still the same, the desks still stacked with paperwork, but everything felt different now. There was a shift in the air, a quiet acknowledgement from her team, her friends, of what she had done. The case was over, but the battle for respect, for accountability, was just beginning. Jessica had earned her respect, but it wasn't the kind of respect she could hold in her hand. It wasn't the kind that could be measured in victories and titles. It was deeper than that. She had fought for something intangible, something that went beyond the rules and the uniforms. She had fought for the right to be heard, to be seen. And even now, with the case behind her, it was clear that there would be more fights ahead. As she looked around the office, she saw Sergeant Daniels at his desk, a quiet smile on his face as he looked up at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was a mutual understanding between them. She had done what needed to be done, and now she had to lead, not just with authority, but with integrity. Every action, every decision would now be a testament to the lessons learned from the trial. Weeks turned into months, and Matthew's name faded from the headlines, but Jessica's resolve only grew stronger. Every interaction she had, every conversation, every small victory was part of a bigger picture, one that she was determined to paint with integrity and honor. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the mountains surrounding Fort Bragg, Jessica sat outside the base, looking at the sky, her thoughts far from the office and the bureaucracy that surrounded her. She thought about Matthews, his arrogance, his fear, his fall from grace, and the humanity behind it all. She thought about the soldiers she had mentored, the women who had come to her seeking advice, and the young recruits she now trained. Jessica realized then that what she had fought for wasn't just about the law. It wasn't about holding Matthews accountable. It was about creating a world where people, especially women, could stand firm, could challenge the powers that be, without fear of being crushed by it. It was about the courage to speak when silence was easier. That night, she found herself standing at the front of a room of new recruits. They were young, eager, full of dreams about what their military careers would hold. As she looked into their faces, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. This was where the real work began, not in the courtroom, not in the headlines, but in the hearts of the soldiers she would guide. "You will face many challenges," Jessica said, her voice steady, commanding, but full of warmth. "You will meet people who will tell you that you don't belong, that your voice doesn't matter. But I'm here to tell you that your voice matters. Stand firm. Speak up. Lead with integrity, and remember that true leadership isn't just about power, it's about responsibility." She paused, looking at each face in the room, making sure they understood the gravity of her words. Then, with a quiet, resolute smile, she added, "And when you feel like the world is against you, when you feel like the weight of the uniform is too much to bear, remember this: you are never alone. You have the strength to make a difference, and you have the courage to be the change you want to see." As the recruits nodded, the weight of her words settling in, Jessica felt a strange peace wash over her. The world outside would always be complicated, full of power struggles and missteps, but inside this room, she knew she had done something that truly mattered. And maybe, just maybe, the fight for justice wasn't about winning every battle. It was about knowing when to stand tall, when to speak up, and when to walk away. Knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, was part of something much bigger. What do you think Jessica's victory really means for her and for the world around her? How do you think the fight for justice continues, even after the courtroom drama fades away? If you enjoyed this story, comment 100 to show your support. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your friends. Thanks for watching Life Stories.